Called A Voice for This Historic Moment by the Washington Post, Grammy-nominated baritone Will Liverman continues to bring his compelling performances to audiences nationwide. He is starring in the production of Terence Blanchard's Fire Shut Up in My Bones, which debuts Thursday, March 24th at the Lyric Opera House. The Chicago Defender had a chance to talk to the baritone about his role in this production and the role of African Americans in opera. But I wanted to ask you, can you kind of give me a little insight into your background and how you became a classical artist?
Yeah. I started out when I was in high school, actually. I grew up playing piano, but when I got to high school, I did this program called the Governor School for the Arts in Norfolk, Virginia. And it's an all performing arts high school, and it's outside of my public high school. So folks that went to Governor School essentially we went to two high schools. We would do our public school in the morning and hop on a bus and do Governor School in the afternoon. And I did the voice program for 4 years, and that's where I learned. It was actually it was a classical voice program for high schoolers. So we had, fully staged operas that we would do. I had my first voice lessons. We did concerts and recitals, and or we would take a few trips to New York City and go to the Metropolitan Opera. And, those experiences and what I learned there, influenced me to pursue a career in opera. And so it all started with that program and my mentors there.
So you've always wanted to study classical.
Yeah, I would say I thought that, when I was younger, doing piano and stuff, that I would be a music educator because my dad was a teacher. But yeah, like once I started really going down this path of opera, things became more and more clear that this was something that I could, try and make a living doing. So, yeah.
So as you're coming into the early stages of your career, what was some of the experiences that you had as a performer?
Yeah, there's really everyone has their own path in opera. It's such a kind of just a toss up and a mix up of luck and things falling in place. For me in my path, like it was a challenge. Like I finished school, I went to Wheaton College in Illinois for my undergrad, and I went on to do my master's at Juilliard. And actually, what brought me to Chicago was the Lyric Opera of Chicago. I did their Young Artist program for 3 years. And there were challenges after that. Making a living as a freelance opera singer is, it's difficult, because once you're freelancing, you're basically, all competing for the same jobs with folks who have been in the business for years and years and years and already have the pedigree and the name. So, those first few years coming out of the program, you really have to hustle and do everything you can to, just take every gig, get your name out there, making sure that your website's up to date and your headshots, and you always have to be hustling. Because, the jobs are already scarce and there's so many singers out there. But for me in my path, I did a lot of competitions, which helped pay the bills and keep me going. Any competition I would find, I would do it. And I won a few, and it really helped, sustain me as work began to pick up. And over time, I got an agent and who, helped facilitate things, and the gig offers that I started to get, and it all just started to build slowly. I never really went to Europe to have a career. Everything was, everything that I've done mostly has been in the States. And yeah, but there's, like I said, the challenges, I think, being a black singer, especially one of my height too, for a baritone and competing against other, some of those roles that are like soldier roles or roles of like, of stature, and being that this is a Eurocentric art form, that was started in Europe, and for black singers coming in, to really, push the people on the other side of the table who only can envision, a certain type of a person in a certain role. And I've never been, no one's ever like told me that, but it's all proof in the casting. You can just look and see companies over the years have only hired, or have not hired, artists of color. But that's starting to change, and we're starting to see more diversity on the stages. But yeah, that's always, been one of the challenges. But after doing Fire in New York and having more opportunities at the Met, that's really opened up the door for me to, continue to make debuts in places and, further my career. So.
Well, talk to me about your role in Fire. How did that come about for you?
It was crazy. It all happened for me during the pandemic. It was just, that was a wild ride in 2020. A lot of us singers were losing work, and I was doing everything I could to, get by. I was doing a lot of virtual concerts and things and teaching, but Fire was nowhere on my radar until, like, I want to say August of 2020, or July or something. I got an email from my agent that the Met was planning to do Fire Shut Up in My Bones, at a different. They were going to move up their time because originally they already had Fire Shut Up in My Bones on the books, but it wasn't supposed to. They weren't supposed to premiere it until like 2024 or 2023 or something. But after the events of George Floyd, I think that really sparked a lot of conversations, in the classical world about how we can be more inclusive and more diverse in telling Black stories. So I think that was a big indicator, for the Met to be like, well, we have this show by our first Black composer, let's move it up, and have it be the first thing we open with. And so with that, I think they just decided to recast it, because I've always known about the piece, but I was never involved from the world premiere. And the St. Louis cast was amazing. I heard a lot of great things about, their production, but I wasn't a part of it. It wasn't until that phone call when the Met asked me to audition virtually, for the role of Charles. And so I learned the aria in like a day or two, recorded it at a studio, in Chicago downtown, and then submitted it. And then, like, maybe a few days after that, it was a very quick sort of done deal. It's like sent in the tape. They got back to us and like, okay, the role's yours. And like maybe 3 weeks after that was a big season announcement. It all just happened so unexpectedly and so fast. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, were you familiar with the book before you got cast in the role?
Nope, I didn't know. When I first saw that St. Louis was doing Fire Shut My Bones, I thought it was a Pentecostal opera. I thought it was a church opera because that's like, I grew up in church, so like that's a very clear, like indicator of, I just think of a preacher.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know. So I didn't know anything about the book until honestly, I didn't really know anything about Charles Blow until I started doing research after I got cast and read the book and yeah.
So how do you approach preparing not just for the role, but for that rehearsal and
Hmm.
planning schedule and performing schedule is very grueling. How do you
Yeah,
approach preparing for that?
yeah. Yeah. Fire Shut My Bones was its own thing for a number of reasons. I've never been in a position to play someone who's like living and breathing. First of all, so it's like you have all the material like right there in terms of research with the book, watching, his Instagram videos online just to get a sense of who he is. And like, that's very rare to have in an opera. So doing that homework dramatically, a lot of the homework too is making sure that you're prepared musically, because it's such a taxing role and you're basically on stage beginning to end. And so I spent a lot of the summer just hashing out the role and making sure that I have it, had it locked in because you don't want your musical preparedness to hinder you from the storytelling. So I spent a lot of time, with coaches, getting that prepared. And really, I kind of just came in with an open mind. Like did the best that I could with, getting prepared for the music and the dramatic side of things. And really, I think it was a matter of us building it together with the team, with Fire, with the director, assistant director, and my colleagues and co-stars, Angel Blue and Tanya, because, it's important that we all, can be in that space together and feel safe, especially considering the subject matter. And also Walter, he's amazing, and that is Charles Jr., or Charles Baby. And so it really was, a day by day sort of thing, just taking our time with it. And the hard part for me, honestly, was, the intensity of the drama. It's really hard to kind of get in and out of that, mindset when you're in rehearsal, and then you get out of rehearsal and some of it still is with you. And I think it's, trying to find that balance of telling the story and being true to what the story is, but then protecting yourself as an artist so you don't let it get too emotional. Because at the end of the day, we still have to sing and deliver it. So, like, we all had our moments in rehearsal where we, get teary eyed. Like, Latanya and I couldn't do the end of the opera for the first like 4 or 5 times because, we just break down and cry. And, you got to get those things out of your system and, let those real emotions happen so you can, get to that balance and that fine line. I'm just grateful that the experience at the Met was so good because we had such a great cast and people on the other side of the table, like Camille Brown, who was instrumental like with the choreography, and Rajendra, who was our assistant director. Just folks of color too that you just don't see on the other side of the table a lot of the times. Ricky, like all those folks, and were huge into helping Fire get on its feet, and it was really special.
Yeah. Now, for those that aren't familiar, can you just give me kind of a brief overview of what Fire is about and who your character is?
Yeah, I play the role of Charles Blow, and you might know him today as a famed and acclaimed writer, but for the story of Fire, it recalls the events of when he was sexually abused by his cousin when he was a kid, um, and the shame that he goes through and deals with. Especially in black families, that type of thing is always hush hush. You don't talk about it. And so it kind of takes his journey from the abuse up until he goes to school at Grambling State. And it's a way, it's just like coping with it, and him wanting to put the blame of the things that's happening in his life personally on that event, which is so significant, which he hasn't had a chance to really, talk through it, really tell. And so he finds comfort and solace in different ways. He goes to church, he, gets a girlfriend, he pledges and all of these things, but still like the inner turmoil of the abuse is still there. And it gets to a point where he, decides to go kill his cousin. So he has a gun. And that's for the purposes of the opera storytelling. The show starts with him with a gun in his hand, and he's heading to go kill his cousin Chester. And then if you haven't read the book or know anything about it, you see that scene, and then it could be a little confusing. But then they go back and explain why he has the gun, and it leads back up to the moment at the end. So it's sort of like a mirroring sort of thing. So we see him with the gun, and then we recount the events up into the abuse and then after. And then, at the end, it's beautiful because it's a story of overcoming. Had he had gone and killed his cousin, we wouldn't have the Charles Bow that we know today. And so, he decided to lay it down and to move on. One of the big things, the quotes in that opera that always come back, that comes back. So Tanya uh, mom, always says in her aria, sometimes you just got to leave it in the road, and you live with it. But you can either let that thing, hold you down, or I mean, you learn how to, let that be a part of you, but don't let that stop you from growing and becoming the person that were meant to become. Um, so that's sort of just like the overall arc of the story. And the opera is beautiful. There's so many moments and musical moments and dramatic moments in it that are meaningful. For me, it's beautiful because it's a story about a black man. It's a story. I mean, on a bigger scale, I think it's a story. While it is a black story, a lot of folks have this story
Mhm.
and haven't been able to talk about it. So I think it creates, for first of all, a space for people to talk about, abuse and because it's such a delicate subject, and I feel this opera really sheds some light onto that. But also, it's really great because for me, it's great to see black culture and represented so beautifully on the operatic stage that you never really see. It's different from Porgy and Bess, and that like it's just genuine blackness on stage with the stepping and the church scene and just how we are as people, Joyce people, the club scene. um it's it's really beautiful to see that represented. And so that's all the things that make Fire what it is. And kudos to Opera Theater St. Louis and Jim and Terence uh for putting this thing, bringing this idea to life and bringing the opera into the world to be a part of the canon.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, like, this is not a story that is often told, especially via this medium, opera and
Hmm.
classical music. Like, what do you think personally is the significance of being able to tell a story like this
Hmm.
in this art form, with this art form?
I think one of the biggest things that this story does is be a gateway for other stories to be told. Because I think that's one of the things in opera that we need more of is more inclusion and more diversity in our stories, because there's so many stories out there. Of course, we can't tell them all on the operatic stage, but I think it opens the gateway for other composers and other creators to look at a story like Fire and be inspired by that. Especially seeing, the Metropolitan Opera, the mecca of all the places, is like saying, we stand behind, new works and black composers and, important stories like this. I hope that, it serves as a, kind of a bridge for new works down the line.
Do you think stories like this and performances like this will help bring Black audiences, that aren't typically known for frequenting,
Mm-hmm.
opera or classical music? Do you think stories like this will help kind of bring
Mm-hmm.
our community into this art form?
Oh yeah, and we saw proof of that in New York. I was, of course, I wasn't on the audience side of things, but I had a lot of friends who were so excited. A lot of my black friends be like, they have never seen the Met so diverse, like
Mhm.
in the audience, white, black, Asian, it's just everybody was just so excited about, the story and the fact, let's not forget that, Terence Blanchard was first black composer to have a work at the Met. And, all those things are so significant. Um, and yeah, we saw proof of what your opera house can look like when you include us and make space for us. Um, and so the trick of it is like, how do we continue to build on to that? I think sometimes, we have these moments where we'll tell like a diverse story and then it goes away and we revert back to,
Mhm.
the regularly scheduled Toscas and Bohems and all of the operas that you make opera like the canon. But we have to find a way to keep, pushing and getting outside the box and to keep the audiences that come for Fire at the Opera House, And but yeah, I think that was one of the most exciting things about being a part of Fire was just I was just leaving
I'm really hoping, to see more of this reflected in the classical community, because
Yeah,
they're beautiful stories to be told. So
absolutely.
I'm really
Absolutely.
looking forward to seeing this one, because
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I've been to the Lyric Opera House and seen
Mhm. Mhm.
myself reflected. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
just
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
regardless of the stories, just to
Right.
see, us
Yeah.
on that stage and performing in that way, I just think is extremely impactful. So I cannot
Yeah.
thank you enough for talking to the Chicago Defender. And Fire Shut Up in My Bones is a new opera from six-time Grammy Award winner Terence Blanchard and Casey Lemmons, based on the memoir by New York Times columnist Charles Blow. The opera follows young Charles on his inspirational journey to becoming a man. Taken through turbulent 1970s rural Louisiana, where Charles faces a chaotic home life and self-doubt on his path towards college and ultimately to self-acceptance. Fire Shut Up in My Bones premieres at the Lyric Opera House in Chicago, March 24th, and runs through April 8th.